The situation is no longer in the world headlines, but the people of Los Angeles continue to suffer. It's not just the fact that some fires may be burning and destroying properties and other fires may ignite. It's also the fact that some places are now getting rain, so they're being deluged by mud and water, as well as toxic ash from the fires now raining down on them. So this is why disasters matter. People get hurt. People die. There have been at least 28 deaths from this year's fires around the Los Angeles area. And those who survive will be cleaning up for months, if not years. Imagine you're given 5 minutes warning that you have to evacuate and flee now, not knowing what you will return to. And thousands of properties became no more than ash. This is what we try and do in RDR. Understand why these disasters happen and understand how we can stop them happening so that people are helped in their suffering, but more to the point, so that people don't suffer, because prevention is better than cure. And we always ask ourselves, where do these disasters come from? What decisions occur so that people end up in a firestorm, have to drive through the flames, risking their lives, and may lose everything that they've ever owned and everything that they've ever known, particularly when fires in the Los Angeles area are not new. In fact, in the past century, Malibu in particular has had over 90 fires, 90 fires. So every 3 to 4 years, something in the area burns. Even the fact that we've had these more than 24 deaths this year still does not compare to 2018, when there were over 100 wildfire deaths around the Los Angeles area, with one fire in particular killing over 80 people. When we look at why the fires happen, this year, it's actually not that unusual. Yes, there was months of very low precipitation. Some areas didn't receive any rain at all. That is unusual. And we can probably link that to human-caused climate change. Otherwise, the temperatures in the Los Angeles area throughout December and January, actually more or less average. They were maybe a degree Celsius above average, so it's not really statistically significant. This is the sort of temperatures we get around this time of year. The winds were strong. They're called the Santa Ana winds. It is perfectly typical. They are used to those. And of course, the fire has to start somehow. Where the fires are arson, vehicles backfiring, barbecues, carelessly discarded cigarettes or cigars. I mean, that's nothing to do with the environment. Nature doesn't cause us to actually start fires in these ways. The two main natural sources of flames are volcanic eruptions from lava, which didn't happen in the Los Angeles area, and lightning. Lightning happens all the time. Of course, we should expect it. So suddenly, a fire ignites. It reaches where we live, it burns houses, it kills people. Why does this appear to be unusual? Why is this hitting the headlines? Again, we have this long history of fires in this area and of course around the world. Interestingly, we can look at another California fire, Laguna Beach, 1998. It was a huge firestorm. Again, many properties burned, there was nothing left. Although one property survived almost intact and could be inhabited soon after the fire went out. Great Slave Lake in northern Canada, very similar in 2011. Major fire swept through a community, reduced homes to ashes, and one home survived. Even in Los Angeles in 2025, there are many examples of single buildings, single properties, where the flames swept past, swept over them, and that property survived. So what is going on here? It's not the fire per se. It's often people dealing with their properties in a certain way. But it seems strange. We look at the flames, we look at the embers, we look at the smoke. How could a house ever survive that cataclysm? Well, they did because people took measures. Is it flame-resistant materials for the doors, for the walls, for the windows? Is it ensuring that on the openings into a property, like pipes or skylights or vents, you've put fire-resistant mesh on it, so the mesh is big enough so it lets in air and you get the ventilation, but it's small enough so that it stops embers from going inside? Have any cracks in the walls or spaces between the windows and the walls been sealed because embers can get in and ignite the property inside? Or even in some places in Los Angeles this year, people actually stayed behind, soaked their property with water, and that helped the property survive. That's a human being making a decision, taking a huge risk, a potential lethal risk. And some people who stayed behind to defend sadly perished. This is part of what we teach you. This is part of what we research. This is part of what we're trying to understand. About 10 to 15 years ago, Australia, which also has highly destructive, what they call bushfires, wildfires, vegetation fires, at times more than 100 people die in a certain fire. And Australia decided, actually, we need to train people to stay and defend or leave early. Basically, go early, evacuate early, or stay and defend. Now, that's a fairly clear message. There are a lot of words for these days of social media where people want something very quick, but it's very clear. If you cannot evacuate early, then basically stay behind and defend. Well, okay, that's fine, but what does early mean? And how do you evacuate? Can everyone evacuate? If we consider people with disabilities who have mobility restrictions, if we consider people who may be fired, if they don't turn up to work every day, even when a wildfire is bearing down on them, if we consider the situation in the US at the moment, where mass deportations are going on, fully understandable, some undocumented people may actually feel that they would rather face the danger of the flames than face the danger of being deported back to a country where they may have come from, or perhaps they were born in the US to undocumented parents, or they were brought when they were infants. So they're being deported back to a country that they don't actually know. They have to balance those risks. All of these situations lead into people's decisions about when to evacuate, how to evacuate, whether they even feel safe evacuating, because perhaps they don't have their own private vehicle. They have to somehow get public transport or a common vehicle. Are they scared of assault or harassment? And then where do you go? You have to evacuate to somewhere. If you don't have relatives or friends with whom you can stay, if you cannot afford a hotel or a motel or other paid accommodation, what do you do? Can you even afford a tent and find some place to camp out, with then the danger being that the place where you're camping may go aflame? Why are these disasters involving wildfires happening? Well, part of it, as I alluded to earlier, is drought. So there is a lack of water, which means vegetation dries out, it becomes tinder, it easily catches alight. Los Angeles and many places in Australia are arid lands. We should not expect extensive rain or precipitation. In fact, many of these places, the natural vegetation requires fire to survive. The ecosystem needs fire, and fire has always been part of that ecosystem, so that many of the plant species germinate only after a fire. Similarly, if we look around Los Angeles, they have actually replaced some of these natural fire-accepting ecosystems with trees which they like, may have come from the east coast of the US, may not even be native to the US, which are very water intensive. They require a lot of water to survive, which means that in an arid land, you build subdivisions with people who use a lot of water. We use a lot of water day to day. You can see the kitchen behind me. as well as planting trees and other vegetation which suck up the water. So suddenly, even when there is regular rainfall, we are using more water, so droughts are more likely. All of these processes are long-term. We're not talking about a single lightning strike. We're not talking about that simple decision. Now, what's happening? Do I stay or do I evacuate early? We're talking about long-term processes, urban development, building codes, planning, how we treat people. I refer to undocumented people. I refer to people who may be fired for not turning up to work, or people who are marginalized anyway, who are scared to evacuate or have no place to go. These are all about society, not about nature. Do people have building codes or planning regulations? Do they monitor and enforce them? Do they know what to do? Are they aware that, in fact, it's not just about the building regarding what I mentioned of meshes and vents and fire-resistant materials, but it's a whole garden in terms of clearing burnable vegetation around you and putting in vegetation which may burn less. These take a long time. They cannot be done overnight. So we're creating a society where we build a megacity in a fire-prone area. We use water for some very legitimate reasons and some reasons which are not great, such as supporting non-native vegetation. We treat many people in society terribly so that they don't have the information they need. They don't have the opportunity they need to deal with a natural fire. They don't have the resources they need to deal with a natural fire. And then we sort of wonder, well, why did a disaster happen? Why did some people evacuate and some didn't? Why did some people lose everything they have, whereas others lost a $5 million mansion, but they have 4 other $5 million mansions around the US, so really, what does it matter? What is a disaster? With all these other factors, it's not the fire exactly. It's not the burning exactly. It's actually choices and decisions that we have made, society has made, to put some people in harm's way without the options, resources, or political power to deal with it, whereas others do have the possibilities to look for information, to improve their property, to improve their landscaping, or to evacuate and still manage because they could afford insurance. And they speak the language and understand the culture so they can deal with the insurance company. Or they have the assets that they can rebuild without insurance. And they've been able to prepare, so they've managed to evacuate with everything that they need, not losing irreplaceable items. These are all about us. These are all human decisions. And we see this across a wide range of perfectly typical, perfectly usual environmental phenomena, such as earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods, avalanches, tsunamis, storms, droughts, floods. So it's our decisions. It's how we treat people. It's how we treat the environment around us, which actually causes a disaster. It's only the human dimensions which cause a disaster, not what nature is doing, not what nature throws at us, whether it is a wildfire or all these other phenomena. And this is what the degree will show you. Not only assigning blame, which is important, not only talking about these causes, which is important, but also then thinking about how to do something about it. Building codes and planning regulations to deal with earthquakes in earthquake zones, which of course Los Angeles is also. Trying to determine in these fire situations, how do we deal with undocumented people, indigenous peoples, marginalized populations, prisoners, people who have pets, people who have service animals like seeing eye dogs and hearing ear dogs. All the people that are wonderfully make up the diverse society, all of them have their own needs, their own difficulties, and their own opportunities to offer something to others. How do we create that sense of community so we're helping each other while helping ourselves? We have the core messages that we can provide to people. They know that they are living in an arid land with a possibility for wildfires, with toxic ash, with floods, with earthquakes, with possibilities for many other hazards to come from nature. And yet still there is not a disaster. This is how we can change for the better. This is how we can prove the message that disasters are about us. They are from us, they are because of us, not nature, not the environment, not the fire, not the storm, not the flood. And since the disasters do not come from nature, they are not natural. We try and avoid the phrase natural disaster. Of course, it's been all over the media. People say, well, this is one of the worst natural disasters to hit LA, which is not true because, of course, COVID-19 was a major disaster which affected everyone horrifically. They will say, well, this natural disaster had killed these 24 people or more, and they've destroyed 17,000 properties. But that's an incorrect phrase. They're simply disasters, not natural disasters. Even terming it a disaster event sort of raises all the questions that we're going to ask you during your time at UCL. Why is it an event? When Los Angeles has been built as a city for more than a century, when they have all this experience with wildfires, when we see the rich-poor gap expanding over decades, when we see the racialization of that society expanding over decades, when there's been significant oppression, discrimination, and marginalization against certain people over decades and more, this disaster was not a lightning strike in the making. It was not a day in the making. It was not even a year in the making. This disaster, in fact, all disasters are long-term processes based on how we deal with society, how we structure society, how we treat each other, and how we are going to try to do better, including through the discussions, the knowledge, the assessments, the opportunities that you would have at UCL. So yeah, disasters are not natural. Disasters are not events. Disasters are about us, what we can do, how we can ensure that we bring a humanitarian ethos to our daily lives and our decades of work in order to try to do better. And hopefully, now that Los Angeles so sadly has an opportunity to rebuild part of it, can we do so much better in being humanitarian, in accepting responsibility for disasters, and rebuilding in such a way that the next time a major wildfire goes through, it's simply a wildfire, not a disaster. Thank you.